Subscribe to this channel to watch more story videos, and don't forget to press the bell icon. Elena Volkov pressed her face against the small airplane window, watching the endless expanse of Nebraska farmland stretch below like a patchwork quilt. At 38, she carried herself with a quiet dignity that spoke of years spent caring for others, her dark hair streaked with premature silver that caught the afternoon light. The worn leather purse in her lap contained everything she owned: a few photographs, her mother's rosary, and exactly $47 in American currency. 3 months earlier, she had responded to an advertisement in a magazine that somehow found its way to her small village outside Kiev. Hard-working American farmer seeks devoted wife for companionship and partnership. The correspondence that followed had been brief but promising. James Morrison, 45, owned 300 acres of corn and soybeans. He sent a photograph of himself standing beside a red pickup truck, squinting into the sun, and wrote of long days and quiet evenings, of needing someone to share both the work and the solitude. Elena had been honest about her age, her circumstances, even her inability to bear children after complications from a miscarriage years before. James had seemed unfazed, writing back that he valued character over youth, partnership over passion. They exchanged letters for 2 months, and she began to imagine a life of purpose again, of morning coffee shared in comfortable silence, of hands working side by side in a kitchen garden. But when she finally stood in the arrivals area of the small regional airport, clutching the address written in James's careful handwriting, the man who approached her was not the one from the photograph. This James Morrison was older, thinner, with calculating eyes that swept over her like she was livestock at auction. "You look older than your pictures," were his first words, spoken without even the courtesy of a greeting. Elena's English was careful but clear. "I sent recent photographs. I have not changed. The light must have been good." He picked up her single suitcase without warmth. "Well, come on then." Trucks outside. The ride to his farm passed an uncomfortable silence broken only by his occasional complaints about the cost of her airline ticket and the inconvenience of picking her up. When they arrived at a modest farmhouse surrounded by endless fields, James showed her to a small room barely larger than a closet. "You can stay here tonight," he said. "But I need to think about this arrangement. You're not what I expected." Elena unpacked her few belongings with shaking hands. She had sold everything she owned to afford the journey, burned every bridge in her old life for this chance at a new beginning. She prepared dinner that evening with ingredients from his sparse pantry, setting the table for 2 with care. James ate in silence, occasionally shaking his head as if confirming some private disappointment. The next morning, over a breakfast she had risen early to prepare, he delivered his verdict. "This isn't going to work," he said, not meeting her eyes. "You're too old, and frankly, not what I had in mind. I've decided to pursue other options." "But our letters," Elena said quietly. "We discussed my age. You said it didn't matter. That was before I saw you in person. Look, I'll pay for your ticket back to Ukraine. Consider it compensation for the inconvenience." Elena sat very still, feeling something fracture inside her chest. Not her heart, that had been broken before and survived. This was something deeper, a fundamental crack in her faith that the world still held space for someone like her. "I have no home to return to," she said finally. "I sold my apartment, my job. I told everyone goodbye." James shrugged, already moving toward the door. "That's not my problem. You have 3 days to figure something out." That afternoon, Elena walked into town, a cluster of buildings that could barely be called a village. Her small savings would last perhaps 2 weeks if she was careful. She inquired about work at the diner, the grocery store, anywhere that might need an extra pair of hands. But without proper documentation, without connections, the doors remained closed. On her second day, she noticed an elderly man sitting alone on a bench outside the library, feeding pigeons from a paper bag. Something about his solitude called to hers, and she found herself sitting at the other end of the bench, watching the birds peck at crumbs with desperate efficiency. "They're always hungry," the man said, his voice carrying a slight accent she couldn't place. "No matter how much you feed them, they act like they're starving." Elena nodded. Perhaps they remember hunger too well to trust that food will come again. The man looked at her then, really looked, with eyes the color of winter sky. He was perhaps 60, with silver hair and hands marked by decades of honest work. There was something in his face that spoke of loss gracefully born, of kindness that hadn't curdled into bitterness despite whatever hardships life had delivered. "I'm Samuel," he said. "Samuel Kowalski." "Elena." You're not from here. No, I am from Ukraine. I came to. She paused, unsure how to explain her humiliation. I came for a new beginning that did not begin. Samuel nodded as if this made perfect sense. New beginnings are tricky things. Sometimes they look different than we imagined. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, two strangers sharing the particular loneliness that comes from starting over in a place where everyone else has deep roots. Are you hungry? Samuel asked eventually. I was about to get some coffee at Murphy's. The pie there is terrible, but the company might be good. Over coffee and slices of apple pie that was actually quite good, Elena found herself telling Samuel everything. About her village, her mother's long illness, the advertisement, the letters, and James Morrison's crushing rejection. Samuel listened without judgment, occasionally asking gentle questions that showed he was truly hearing her story. I had a wife once, Samuel said when Elena finished. Margaret. We were married 37 years before the cancer took her. She would have liked you. Had the same way of making tea into a ceremony, of seeing the sacred in small things. You must miss her very much. Every day. But missing someone and being stuck in the past are different things. Margaret always said life is for the living. He paused, stirring his coffee thoughtfully. I have a house, Elena. Too big for just me, and too quiet most of the time. If you need a place to stay while you figure things out, you're welcome to it. No strings, no expectations. Just one person helping another. Elena studied his face, looking for the catch, the hidden agenda, the trap that her recent experience had taught her to expect. But Samuel's offer seemed to carry nothing but genuine kindness, the sort of help offered simply because someone needed helping. I could cook, she said finally. And clean. I am good at both. I'm sure you are. But I'm offering friendship, not employment. Though I won't lie, the house has been full of frozen dinners and takeout since Margaret died. I'd forgotten how nice it is to sit down to a real meal. Samuel's house was a craftsman-style bungalow on the edge of town, surrounded by flower beds that showed signs of once careful tending now slightly overgrown. Inside, it was clean but sparse, as if someone had removed the warmth along with the feminine touches. Margaret's sewing room, Samuel said, showing Elena to a bright bedroom filled with afternoon light. She always said it would make a good guest room someday. That first evening, Elena prepared a simple dinner of soup and bread, setting the table with cloth napkins she found in a drawer, lighting a candle she discovered in a kitchen cabinet. When Samuel came in from his workshop in the garage, he stopped in the doorway, something shifting in his expression. It's been 2 years since this table was set for dinner, he said quietly. I'd forgotten how it changes a house. Over the following weeks, they settled into an easy rhythm. Elena would rise early to tend the flower beds, coaxing Margaret's perennials back to their former glory. Samuel worked part-time at the hardware store in town, a semi-retirement that kept him busy without overwhelming him. They shared meals, comfortable silences, and gradually, stories. Elena learned that Samuel had emigrated from Poland as a young man, working construction to put himself through engineering school. He and Margaret had wanted children but were never blessed with them, instead pouring their parental energy into nieces and nephews, into coaching Little League and volunteering at the church nursery. Samuel learned that Elena had been a teacher before her mother's illness required her full-time care, that she spoke 4 languages and had once dreamed of traveling the world before life narrowed her options to survival and duty. You still could, Samuel said one evening as they worked together in the garden, Elena teaching him the proper way to deadhead roses. Travel, I mean, you're only 38, that's not old, whatever that fool Morrison made you believe. Elena paused in her work, considering. I used to think 38 was young. But when someone looks at you and sees only the years you've accumulated, not the life you've lived, it makes you feel ancient. Some people measure time differently, Samuel said. Morrison probably counts only the years that serve his purposes. But real living isn't about how many candles are on your birthday cake. It's about how much light you bring to the world. As autumn arrived, painting the world in shades of gold and crimson, Elena realized that she had stopped thinking about her situation as temporary. She no longer scanned newspapers for employment opportunities or saved every dollar toward some uncertain future. Instead, she found herself planning next year's garden, discussing with Samuel the possibility of canning vegetables from their expanded plot. It was Samuel who brought up the elephant that had been living quietly in their shared space. Elena, he said one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in impossible colors. I need to tell you something, and I need you to know I'm not expecting any particular response. Elena set down her teacup, sensing the importance of the moment. I've grown to care for you, Samuel continued, his words measured but clear. Not as a housekeeper or a companion, but as a woman I admire and respect. You've brought life back into this house, back into my days. But more than that, you've reminded me that the heart doesn't follow the calendar. He paused, looking out at the garden they had restored together. I know you came here looking for one kind of partnership and found rejection instead. I know you've been hurt and disappointed. But if you're willing, I'd like to offer you something different. Not a marriage of convenience or necessity, but a union of two people who choose each other not because they have to, but because they want to. Elena felt tears prick her eyes, but these were not the tears of humiliation she had shed over James Morrison's rejection. These were tears of recognition, of coming home to herself. Samuel, she said, reaching for his hand. When James looked at me, he saw only what I was not. Too old, too tired, too worn by life. But when you look at me, I see myself reflected as someone worthy of love. Not despite my age, but including it. You see my years as part of my story, not the end of it. They were married on a crisp December morning in the small church where Samuel and Margaret had worshipped together for decades. Elena wore Margaret's wedding dress, altered to fit her by Samuel's neighbor, a seamstress who proclaimed it perfect for a woman, who knows the value of love that's chosen, not just fallen into. The ceremony was small. Samuel's extended family, a few close friends, and even the librarian who had witnessed their first meeting on the bench outside her workplace. As they exchanged vows, Elena realized that this was what true love looked like, not the passionate intensity of youth, but the deep recognition of two souls who had lived enough to know the rarity of real connection. James Morrison was not there, of course. Elena had seen him once since that awful morning of rejection, in the hardware store where Samuel worked. He had looked older somehow, diminished, and Elena felt only a distant pity for a man who had confused love with shopping, who had thought he could order a wife like he might order seed corn, returning her if she didn't meet his specifications. As she and Samuel danced to their first song as husband and wife, a gentle waltz that accommodated their no longer young bodies, Elena thought about the strange paths that lead us to where we belong. She had come to Nebraska as a mail-order bride, a woman desperate enough to cross an ocean for the promise of companionship. She had been rejected for being too old, cast aside like damaged goods. But in that rejection, she had found something infinitely more valuable than what she had originally sought. She had found a man who loved not the idea of a wife, but the reality of Elena herself. Who saw her silver-streaked hair as beautiful, her gentle lines as evidence of a life fully lived, her careful English as charming rather than inadequate. Samuel spun her carefully in his arms, and Elena laughed, feeling younger than she had in years. Not because love had erased her age, but because it had made her age irrelevant. In Samuel's eyes, she was not too old, too tired, or too anything. She was simply herself, and herself was enough. The snow began to fall as they left the church, dusting the world in white like a fresh beginning. Elena caught snowflakes on her tongue and thought about second chances, about the way life sometimes takes us through darkness to lead us to an unexpected light. She had come to America as Elena Volkov, a rejected mail-order bride with $47 and a broken heart. She was leaving the church as Elena Kowalski, a woman who had learned that true love doesn't arrive on schedule or according to our specifications. Sometimes it comes disguised as friendship, grows quietly in shared silence, and blooms in the space between what we thought we wanted and what we actually needed. As Samuel helped her into their car, his touch gentle and sure, Elena smiled at the beautiful unpredictability of it all. She had been rejected for being too old, but she had found a man who understood that love, like wine, only improves with age. And perhaps that was the greatest gift of all, not to be loved despite her years, but to be loved including them, celebrating them, honoring them as part of the woman she had become. The car pulled away from the church, carrying Mr. and Mrs. Kowalski toward their shared future, leaving behind only footprints in the snow and the echo of laughter that proved, once and for all, that it's never too late for a new beginning.